5 weeks and less than 20 grand to build a car that reflects both the country of its origin and its late 1980s roots, the premise of this build series proved a lot harder to execute than both teams anticipated. Team Australia spent most of week 1 locating a suitable car and planning the mods that would bring it into the 21st century, within the allocated budget. The team ended week 2 on budget, but way behind schedule. Team USA's progress was almost the exact opposite. The guys wasted no time finding an ex-race car and getting a replacement engine. While their progress was impressive, their adherence to the budgetary confinements was not. So since our last episode, our budget's actually taken a bit of a hit, mostly because of this thing. So when you're putting more power in out of an engine, obviously you need a gearbox to suit. The standard Jatco wasn't going to cut it. So what we've got here is another Jatco. This one is stronger than the last one. It's been built to handle more power, and it's fitted with a 3 grand stall, which means we should be able to get off the line if we're doing a bit of drag racing. So our other big purchase was this sexy beast right here. Again, this one's an eBay purchase, and we've done really well because we've managed to find this diff that will fit straight in. It's got 3.89 ratios, so still really good for like highway driving and on the street. It's a full spool centre, so we'll get some nice chirpy noises when we go around corners. And best of all, we've got 31 spline billet axles, which means on a hard launch, we should break something else that's not an axle.
Mate, the reason I needed you was that we're going to be replacing the diff, and to replace the live axle rear end diff in this car, I need somebody to be sitting in the driver's seat holding that brake pedal down so that when I undo everything, I can get the diff out.
Rad. So I'm doing the job of a brick.
That's exactly what you'll be doing today.
Perfect. It's probably only the second time in my life I've been able to see eye to eye with Scott. These guys don't know this, but I'm actually scared of heights. But do you still want me to hold it? Righto. Sometimes when I've got a bit of quiet time to myself, I like to open up the good book and just memorise a few passages. I'm a bit concerned the Americans might take this build-off challenge like a little too seriously, so thought I better study up. Hey guys, do you still need me to keep my foot on the brake?
Yeah, man, just keep on the brake. Yeah, it's perfect.
The slightly refreshed RB30 was ready to go back into the car. To avoid going grossly over budget, we've kept the internals mostly stock and only replaced the most needed parts like the camshaft, valve springs and head gasket. In the last episode, Team USA fitted their monstrous 408 cubic inch LS into the car. The engine went in smoothly with the help of some modified mounting plates.
Okay, so what brought on having to refabricate the mid-plate? We got some big headers. They are a 2-inch primary Headman header with massive collectors. And with all that tubing, we needed some space. So we clearanced away until they fit. All right, see what I mean about these headers? They're massive. But now that we're down here, let's talk about this transmission. This is a 2-speed Power Glide transmission that came with the car. However, for safety's sake, we sent it down to specialty transmission and had them go through it and work their magic with it to make sure we were going to be safe with this thing. Also, we took that opportunity while the transmission was out to utilize a Hughes torque converter. We need to go back and address something with these headers. We had to add O2 bungs to utilize Bosch 4.9 O2 sensors. All right, so I guess all that's left is to fabricate an exhaust. I've got an idea. That'll do. All right, like the transmission, the shifter came with the car, so we lucked out there as well. Now, this shifter is equipped with an electronic solenoid to do the 1-2 shift for us. We'll be utilizing the NEXUS VCU to control that shift. So since this is a more drag race oriented car, we will be utilizing a trans brake. The NEXUS R5 VCU will have full control over that function. We'll be utilizing 2 buttons on the steering wheel, one for the trans brake and one for line lock. Along with handling the trans brake function, we'll also be utilizing a drive shaft speed sensor. That allows us to use the torque management function of the R5 VCU.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey, mate. Hey, where's Vic? Is it past his bedtime or something?
Okay, so yes, it's past my bedtime too. It's like basically midnight. We just got the car going, and we're gonna hit the dyno tomorrow.
On the dyno already? Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are not.
What about you guys?
No, we're not. But we're catching up. We've got an engine in the car. It's the same engine, but it's back in the car.
So we screwed everything back together. We had a few leftover nuts and bolts, but overall, we pretty much got it back in the car, and now we've just got the bigger job of actually of wiring and plumbing and exhausting and all that stuff, like all of the little niddly fiddly bits.
What do you reckon it's going to make power-wise?
Well, do you want on or off nitrous numbers?
Well, everything off nitrous because that's what we're doing. So I assume that's what we're going to judge it on.
Yeah, totally. No, man, that's I'm happy for you. I'm really looking forward to seeing it on the dyno and what sort of power it makes.
It's going to be good.
So we've got this boosted by Aeroflow 5862 turbo. Why this one in particular? Well, it's a fairly compact size. It's going to fit where we want it to. It's fairly streetable. We're looking at putting about 20 PSI into the RB, so it'll do that. And best of all, it was the right price. We're on a budget, as you know, and this fit. Actually, the real best thing about this turbo is that it's much better than the one we had on here before. So on the intake side of things, we've got this beautiful Plasma Man plenum top, bolts onto the factory runners, and at this end we've got a Bosch drive-by-wire throttle body, which means we'll be able to run with the Elite 2500 drive-by-wire. It'll give us all sorts of cool things like cruise control. Okay, on the fueling side of things, we've got this Plasma Man fuel rail, and we've stuffed that full of, I think they're 1100cc Bosch injectors, and that is going to sit down in there, just like that.
Well, mate, I guess my work here is done. It's up to you guys to finish it off now. I don't really get the whole RB thing. This is all on the wrong side and the turbo's on the wrong side, so...
Back to Barrows for you, mate.
Yeah, fun as always.
Thank you so much for coming. Give me a hand.
Thank you, appreciate it. Have fun.
Bye. With the engine and drivetrain installed, it was time for Team USA to turn their attention to the electronics. Needless to say, a build this ambitious would require all the latest and greatest gear.
The car is getting our flagship VCU, the NEXUS R5. The NEXUS R5 is going to be responsible for fuel, ignition, and nitrous control function, along with any other power distribution needs we may have on this application.
The interior also received a freshen up, complete with a brand new IC7 display dash.
All right, we pretty much have everything wrapped up on the interior. We lucked out and the cage was in good shape, aside from a little bit of cleaning. We've got the R5 and the IC7 display mounted. We decided to put the CAN keypad above us on the roll cage so that we could easily access it and make any changes we needed to while strapped in and suited up. We have our nitrous bottle mounted, all the plumbing is done. However, it's time to turn our attention to setting up the dry nitrous control.
We have our intake drilled and plumbed for fogger nozzles. These ports deliver nitrous directly into the intake runner per cylinder. This is the best way to deliver a big horsepower nitrous system because it helps distribute the nitrous evenly to all cylinders. The dry fogger setup is easier to tune and adjust our nitrous to fuel ratio because we can tune each cylinder more effectively through NSP's individual cylinder corrections. Now that the nitrous kit is plumbed, the nitrous feed line is run. Now all we need to do is enable the progressive nitrous control inside the NEXUS R5. I'm going to enable nitrous stage 1. And let's get all these rectifies cured before we reboot the ECU. Nitrous enabled. I want to do it progressively. This kit is going to be progressed over race time, so we want to enable that. Great. And we have minimum coolant temp of 100 degrees. That's acceptable. Engine run time is 5 seconds. Minimum RPM is 5,000, maximum is 8,000. And I believe that's right before the rev limiter. Minimum throttle position is 80%. Now, since this is a dry fogger kit, we do need to have fuel correction, and we also have to have ignition correction. The ignition correction is going to be applied to both banks because it is an overall system. We're not controlling it per bank. I believe we reserved a 25 amp output from our PDM inside the NEXUS R5. So yeah, we sure did. There it is. And now we can reboot the ECU because she requires it to take all these settings we made. That's it. The nitrous dry fogger kit is enabled.
Okay, it's time to install that big bottle of happiness, which calls for a bit of subtle persuasion. That'll do it. The last thing on Team USA's build list was a rear wing. Once again, the Motion Raceworks Santa dropped off a present just in the nick of time.
All right, that's it for our NEXUS and nitrous install.
This Australian nightmare should be ready for startup soon.
With the deadline looming, Team Australia finally got some wind in their sails. The intercooler plumbing and the exhaust were back from the fabricator, and things were beginning to move quickly.
Righto guys, well the old exhaust system's over in the bin. The new one right here from TC Fabrication. He's done a cracking job. He's handmade the dump pipe with the flange to get it done nice and quick for us. It's got a red back muffler, It's got a hot dog in the middle here, so hopefully it won't drone too much. So all I need to do now is bolt the thing on and it should fit like a sort of factory setup.
In keeping with the suburban battler's weekend warrior theme, the exhaust, while considerably less restrictive than the factory one, is still relatively subtle and almost unnoticeable to an untrained eye.
Next up, we've got to keep that charge air cool. So we've had Chris from TC Fabrications help us out with some intercooler pipes, a super fancy little bracket. So this is the air filter. Air goes in to the turbocharger here. Then it comes out of the hot pipe into our Plasma Man intercooler. We've got a Turbo Smart blow-off valve, which we may or may not use, just depending. So obviously for the turbo health, it's really good to have, but being a RB30, we do want to hear a little bit of dose as well. So this thing is adjustable. So we're going to set it up so we get a bit of flutter and we kind of protect the turbo a tiny bit. It's also got a Haltech air temperature sensor in the intake pipe here as well. All of the edges are all beaded here, or they've got a lip on them, so our intercooler pipes aren't going to blow off with our silicon joiners and our hose clamps. So we'll slap all this in now and then we get to the fiddly bit.
With the air conditioning out of the way, there was plenty of room for the new Plasma Man intercooler to fit. Once installed, however, despite its size, the intercooler was barely noticeable from the outside. That's not to say the install was easy, as it did take a while, and it resulted in a bleeding finger or two. Look how good this is. There's some little touches on here that are just amazing. This little bracket that he's fabbed up here that fits onto the factory cross member there. A couple of little other brackets in here that just sort of bolt into factory places. This is actually better than some bolt-in kits that I've had a look at before. Using Dave's pre-prepared loom, the wiring ended up being a fairly straightforward job. Rightio, the engine is in. That means it is time for wiring. Now that's a job that a lot of people really hate. Fortunately for us, we've got Dave, who loves doing things that normal people hate. Okay, Dave, what have you got going on here?
So we've got our Haltech RB terminated loom. I've sort of surgically dissected it and added in a whole bunch of stuff like our drive-by-wire throttle. We wanted to have coolant pressure and temp, so I've added that in as well. We've got a transmission temperature, which I've added in as well.
So when you buy one of these terminated engine looms from Haltech, what you're saying is it's not the be-all and end-all. You can actually modify this if you've got the skill and the know-how.
If you've got the confidence, attack. The colours are all the right colours, the shape, the joints, the breakouts, everything's in the right place, so you can't go too wrong.
So it's just a really good starting point.
It's a really good starting point. I reckon 80 to 85% of this loom is as it was, but I've just changed and added what I needed to add and it should be ready to go.
Cool.
In this car, because it's a fairly straightforward 1980s model thing, we could have opted for a whole bunch of different engine management systems, but I chose the Elite 2500 series. And there's a pretty good reason why I did that. I wanted to have electronic throttle control because I wanted to use the electronic throttle for torque management, for idle control, as well as cruise control if we decide to take this thing on a long drive. Of course, I could have gone for the NEXUS R5 series ECU, but in this particular car, the indicators, the headlights, the tail lights, so all the wiring for that was actually pretty good. If the wiring for that sort of stuff was starting to perish and become a problem, I would have put an R5 in it and wired it headlight to tail light. But because that portion of the harness was already really good, I didn't really see a need to put the R5 in this car. The Elite 2500 is going to do everything I need it to do. So it communicates with all the CAN communication stuff, communicates with the dash, communicates with the wideband. This was the right ECU for this car. Now, since we bought the R31, one of the things that I have learned is that the volts gauge and the oil pressure gauge in the factory dash only lasted 10 years or so, then they stopped working. So if you've got one and those gauges are actually working, well, good for you, that's pretty impressive. Ours didn't. We do want to display a whole bunch of extra stuff as well. Now that this thing, well, we're hoping that it's going to make, you know, twice, 3 times the factory power. I want to put in the Haltech IC7 dash because I'm putting all of the engine sensors directly into the engine. So I'm going to have, instead of having an oil pressure switch, like a on-off, yes, you got oil pressure, or no, you don't switch, I'm putting in a full size, so a 0 to 150 PSI sensor, so I can measure the oil pressure, I can measure oil temperature. I'm putting a coolant pressure and coolant temp sensor in it, a combined Bosch unit, so that I can measure the coolant pressure. And if it happens to lift the cylinder head or crack something, we know at least that normally the coolant pressure will go up. That means that we can start investigating and see what's going on. As with any of this stuff, I'm pretty good with the wiring part of it, but for the fabrication, it's a little bit difficult. So in this R31, I've taken out the factory dash cluster. I've got the IC7 to put in there, but 3D Racing Solutions have come to the rescue. They've 3D printed me a cluster. So all I got to do is put my IC7 dash straight into there. Then it's got the factory mounting holes. I can bolt that straight in, almost a factory replacement. Who would have thought when they built the R31 Skyline that I'd be retrofitting an affordable colour dash into it 35 years later? All right, you ready?
Ready.
This is the bit because, well, I've already cranked it over, I've built oil pressure, I've kind of got it to a point where I know there's nothing really wrong. We've synced up the timing, so now the fuel's turned on, cross your fingers. All right.
Go?
Yep. The suburban dream is alive.
Suburban dream!
It's definitely got a stall converter. Oh, hooly dooly. Seriously, I'm not being smart.
That's how it's changing gears.
That's how she's shifting from now on.
Bit of diff chatter.
It drives good. Very responsive with that turbo, like it's there straight away.
Yeah, right.
Let me zip the power window up. You know what, those Kentuckians have got no idea what they're messing with.
With just 1 week to go, Team USA had a complete race-ready car, but their finances were not in such good shape. Aiming high, the guys spent big and headed into their final week with a $5,313 deficit. Team Australia's were considerably more modest, which is reflected in their spending. The car still needed a tidy up and a dyno tune, but having spent within their means, the Australian balance sheet was in much better shape, with $2,476 still left in the bank. How will all this affect the car's abilities to handle the challenges in the final episode? Guess we'll have to wait till next week to find out.